Hi, I'm Sharon Tatro. I am the chair of the Warrant Committee, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about what we've been up to since really July, leading up to the special town meeting on November 7th, which will be followed by a town vote on November 15th. And so over that period of time, really our goal has been in order to get all of the townspeople as much information as possible, because we understand that this vote that's coming up is for the largest priced building that we have ever put up in town. And the amount of information out there is voluminous, and some of the PDFs are over 2,000 pages. And so really what we wanted to do was to try to pull out the facts in a way that was easily attainable by the citizens in order to be able to make their own informed decision when they get to town meeting. So I'll talk for a minute about why there are two votes first. So there is a vote at special town meeting, and the purpose of that vote is for the town to approve the spending for the school and the appropriation of the budget. So there is a budget that is a total of about $83 million, and then there's about a $19 million reimbursement from the MSBA. The vote at that session on November 7th is to say yes or no, we want to build the school for that budget. It needs to be very clear, actually, that people understand that a yes vote is for the school at Elm Street, that location. A no vote does not automatically move it to another location. It just is absolutely not, we're not going to do the school. For the ballot vote on the 15th, that has very basic language. It's a Proposition 2.5 override, because the only way to pay for the school at such a large amount of money is to raise everyone's taxes. And so that vote on the 15th is really just saying, yes, it's okay to raise my taxes in order to pay for what we voted for. Both votes have to pass. If one passes and the other one doesn't, it still doesn't happen. It has to be both or nothing. And so it's also important to note that the vote on the 7th at special town meeting is what is called a supermajority. So 2/3 of the people have to be able, or have to pass it for it to move forward. For the Proposition 2.5 override that is on the 15th, it only is a simple majority. So just 50% of the town needs to vote for that. Now it gets very tricky if one passes and one doesn't. And so the way that it works is that we've actually created a one sheet on this that's available on our website at the top, and it just says what happens if the vote passes or fails. So that has a nice diagram if anybody would like to look at that. I'll take the simple one first. If both of them pass, then a bond will be taken out by the town. My understanding is that the selectmen will decide whether or not that's going to be a 20-year or a 30-year bond. They'll decide that around December timeframe, because with the interest rates rising, they hope to pull that bond in January. Assuming both votes pass, the selectmen will make a decision about whether or not it's going to be a 20 or a 30-year bond. They will pull the bond in January. The process will move forward, and barring no hiccups, they hope to open the school in the fall of 24. If it is a no vote at both, the town really has to step back and decide whether or not they want to build a school again. And so if we assume it's a no for both, if it was very close, they could do a process that I'll talk about in a minute, which has to do with doing a revote within 120 days. But let's just take the example of we decide not to do a revote within 120 days because they both fail. So if they both fail, it then goes back to the school committee to decide whether or not they would like to continue to pursue a new school. They will be the ones that decides whether or not they want to go into the MSBA process again, or if we want to ask the town to do it without the MSBA and be able to pay for it ourselves. I believe the selectmen will also take part in that decision to move forward. If it is then decided to move forward, they will decide whether or not to do the MSBA again, which the earliest we can apply for that again is April of next year, at least based on today's schedule. And then we have to wait. There is on that one sheet slide that I mentioned and on the SBC website an idea of the timeline that it took us to get to this point, nobody knows. The first time we applied, we were rejected the first couple of times, so it took a few years to get back into the program. There is, of course, the possibility that we could apply in April, we could get back in next year and start again. But the MSBA gets to decide that, we don't. So I think it's anybody's guess as to whether or not we could get back in next year or whether or not we could get back in a couple of years. Assuming we get back into the MSBA process, the process starts again. The town would then have to have a town meeting, vote for another feasibility study, and then eventually when that was done, then we would vote for a new school. I think realistically, if we got back in on the first try, people are thinking that's at least probably a 2-year process. And so a minimum of pushing the school out for 2 years. If you want to take the view that it's going to be a similar timeline as before, it could push the process out 5 to 7 years. It's one of the things that we just don't know. If we take the scenario of one of these votes passes, one of them doesn't. The MSBA allows a town to say within 10 days of the failed vote whether or not they would like to vote again within 120 days. And so that's one of the reasons why these two votes are so close together, because they're both within that 10-day period. And then I believe it is the selectmen that get to decide whether or not we should have another, if it be another town meeting or another ballot vote, whichever one it is that failed. If the other one had passed, which one would we do again? They would reschedule that. It's important to note that it has to be what they say is substantially the same project. So if we take the example that maybe it doesn't get 2/3 on the 7th, but it gets a majority on the 15th, when we would have to hold another town meeting, in order for it to be substantially the same project, the site actually can't change for that. It would still be at Elm Street. One of the things they could change is maybe the size of the building to a degree. There has been discussions that there are pieces of the building that are larger than what the MSBA would reimburse for. The example of that was that the gym is slightly larger, the stage is slightly larger. If they wanted to redesign those down to only say what the MSBA would have, that might reduce the cost some, and then they could do that within the 120 days. It really is anybody's guess as to what would happen. And then in that 120-day period, let's just take the example that it passes at the ballot, but it doesn't pass at town meeting. If we have another special town meeting within the 120 days and it passes, then we get kind of back on track to a school opening in 2024. It really would depend on how quickly I think that would get done or whether or not that pushes the building out. If it doesn't pass, then we would be back in the situation of the selectmen and the school committee deciding how we want to move forward and whether or not it's going to take another 2 years or 5 years, or whether or not we go into the MSBA process, or whether or not we try to pay for it on our own. We wanted to really interview and videotape for the townspeople 5 major constituent groups in town. And so we started that process and we met with the selectmen. We met with the school building committee. We also met with the school committee, and then we met with the 2 municipal ballot action groups in town, both the Dale at Dale group and the For Our Kids for Our Town group. And so we have videos available on our website with all of those. So the intent of all of those was really to have a conversation with them and to understand what they felt the major issues were, what were they hearing from the townspeople, what facts really needed to get out there. And then in addition to that, we opened up a email address, which is still active, warrantcommittee@medfield.net. And what people did was send in questions for what mattered the most to them. And out of those questions, we decided to run 3 more sessions that were really topic-based. So the first one that we ran was called The Future of Dale Street, and that video is on September 23rd. And that really goes through what happens to Dale Street if this vote passes and if this vote fails. Because a lot of questions that we're getting are, if we build this new school down at Elm Street, what happens to that building? And a lot of people are asking to have that question answered at the same time. And there is reasons why it hasn't been answered yet. And so we really covered all of that in there. And I think it's a pretty informative video for anybody that would like to watch it. And then the other question we got a lot about was about the educational program. And we had actually hoped to have some of the teachers come to the school committee session that we did on September 8th, but since that was right at the beginning of school, we decided that it was best to let them focus on the kids and the education that they were beginning for that. And so we had a lot of questions about what exactly is the educational program and what are some of the things that made them choose Elm Street over Dale when it was clear in all of the things that both of them met the educational plan, but there was this feeling from the SBC that the educational plan was met better down at the Elm Street site. And so we really wanted to understand that. And so that video is from September 29th. And that has a lot of staff members from Dale Street School, not just teachers, but other staff. And then the last focus session, because we got a lot of questions on that too, is about our water supply. We recognize that there are wells down near the existing school at Wheelock over by the soccer fields, and the town is spending a lot of money right now doing a building project, the water treatment plant over there. And so this will put another school on that property, and so we really wanted to understand that because there was a lot of questions submitted about that, and that video is available from October 12th. For people to look at. We understand that it is hours and hours of video and it's a lot to watch. So we have taken the time to write out very detailed minutes to all of those, and those are also available on the town website. But anybody who has trouble navigating the town website and would like to read those minutes, they can stop by Town Hall and get a copy and read it on their own. Our real hope in the end of this is that every person in town can make an educated vote when they come on the 7th of November to town meeting, and then again vote for the ballot on November 15th. My personal goal, I will say, is that I felt that no one should feel like they didn't have a question answered. And so that was really why we have done this, is because if someone is going to make their decision based on incomplete information, that's not fair to them. And so our website really tries to pull the key pieces in there. There's several documents that are referenced more than once, but we call out different page numbers on that. And if somebody wanted to kind of open up that website and find out what all those documents are and what they say, if you wanted to get fancy with your computer, our video on September 13th actually goes through most of them. We went through a process where we walked through all of the different documents we were going to put up and talked a little bit about them because we wanted to agree as a committee that these were all factual documents to go up. So if the videos from September 13th and from September 28th walk through all of the documents that are on that, so that's a good tool. So based on the questions that were submitted to the warrant committee email address, we actually have produced a Q&A that is about 75 pages long, and it is available on our website, and we spent 2 meetings going through all of those questions. All of those questions were submitted by different townspeople on a variety of issues. There are things that have to do with water, the educational program, things about the reuse of Dale, about the cost of the building. It's really a tremendous amount of different things that are provided in that. So if someone doesn't have a chance to watch all of the videos, that really is a good document to go through. My whole thought about asking for the questions in the first place is that we'll go back to the old adage that no question is a silly question, and every question deserves to be answered. And if you have a question, chances are your neighbor might have the same question. So we really decided in the end to publish that so that everybody could see exactly what the questions were. And we do refer in a lot of our answers to specific videos or specific minutes that are the most helpful to answer those questions. And if you are actually reading that document on your computer, we did take the time to put hyperlinks in there. So if it says, let's say someone asked a question about the reuse of Dale, we have actually provided a hyperlink to the video on that. So I hope that people take the time to do that, and it is pretty helpful. Now, what we did was we went over the Q&A on 2 different nights. And so our meeting on October 4th, you will see that we went through it. I will admit, we decided to read it. It might put you to sleep trying to do that, and it really is reading it word for word. So you're welcome to watch the video, but also reading the document will give you the same idea for that. On the 14th, we decided to kind of take a different tactic going with the Q&A, and we created 2 different presentations that really took a lot of the questions and put them together. And so Steve Callahan, who is new to our committee and has been an auditor for the last 40 years, decided to really dive into the idea of the cost of the project, how the cost of the project, if you added in options that are talked about with Dale Street, very specifically with Park and Rec. And then he also went through what are some of the other options that have been put out there for what we maybe could have done differently. And if we wanted to go back to what they call the PSR stage, when we actually had numbers for several different options to really be able to say, well, if maybe we had thought about this differently, what would that cost? What does that mean? And really dive into that. So I think it's actually a really good presentation. It takes about an hour of your time if you want to watch the video. I would encourage people to watch the video alongside with the slides, because I think you really need to hear the verbiage that goes along with it from Steve. And it really goes through all the different options that have been presented, what they cost. It goes through really what our townwide master plan talks about in terms of what we kind of see as a town, in terms of the Dale Street School, in terms of Park and Rec, and in terms of open space. All of those kinds of things are inside that townwide master plan. We also looked at what the budget is for the town over the next 5 years. We have a 5-year capital plan, and inside that capital plan is a potential new building for Park and Rec in a few years, but there's also amounts of money in there for what it costs to maintain the Dale Street School. And so if this moves to Elm Street and Dale Street is there, we really have a couple of things to think about, which is how much money is it going to take to continue to maintain the building, and whether or not we want to keep that historic building there and what we might want to use it for. So no matter who uses it, there's cost to maintain an older building. So we put that into the scenarios, and if people really want to take that into account. And for the people that want to assume that Park and Rec moves into that building, then that would take that $16 million project off the plan. And so we are not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination to know what the town is going to decide with the reuse of Dale, because there is a pretty complicated process that goes on with that. But what we really tried to do was pull in the numbers that exist in our current town budget for the maintenance of the building, and then also taking into account the scenario for Park and Rec, because they are actually the only department left that have a building on the books of the town to potentially be built. Granted, all of those things have to go through town meeting going forward. And so that was one large presentation that Steve did that I would encourage people to watch. And then in the second hour of that same meeting on the 14th we had received a tremendous amount of questions about the traffic and about sidewalks in town and about busing and whether or not people are riding their bikes and walking. And so there's lots of different sources of information for that. So we really pulled that together into one presentation, and that goes through the traffic mitigation plans that are budgeted. They've budgeted $300,000 for the traffic mitigation in that area. And what that $300,000 would cover is improved sidewalks, some repainting of the street, and some putting in some signage, some stop signs, some do not enter signs, things like that. What is not included in that is also gone over in the presentation, which is they are not talking about making the road any wider. We don't have the money to put sidewalks in with that, and that in particular $300,000 also does not cover a stoplight. kind of knowing that the other information that is in that presentation really talks about the sidewalks in town and about the condition of them, where they are, and it also gives people an idea of how much a sidewalk costs, because I think outside of this project, that's going to be something that the town is going to have to decide what they want to do about the sidewalks in town, and that really needs to be a separate discussion based on the cost. And then the rest of that presentation talks about what's happening today with the Dale Street School and the Wheelock School and how kids are getting to school, and to kind of really give an idea of how many more cars we might expect down there, because it also goes through how enrollment is versus families that attend the schools. Those two presentations tried to wrap up the vast majority of questions. I will say that the other very large majority of questions we got were on water. We did not put a separate presentation together on water, but I would really encourage people to watch the meeting on October 12th that was about water. There was a consultant that came from Niche Engineering, and she is also on the Conservation Commission for the state. She's also on a board for the Mass DEP, and answered a tremendous amount of questions about the current state of the Wheelock School and the pavement there that was done in the 70s that is going to be improved if the vote passes, and talked about how that improvement to that pavement alone would make the site have less pollutants that it's having right now if you just take in that in particular piece, and talked about that project. But then she also answered other questions about the increased amount of pavement and the different pieces in that. Given that she's a civil engineer that is an expert on water, we thought that it was better for her presentation to stand alone than for us to try to do another one. So those, I think, were the three kind of biggest pieces of the Q&A that I would encourage people to look at, as well as just read the Q&A. It's a good source of information. We would really like to encourage everyone to please come and vote at the special town meeting. Medfield is based on, in our charter, really a participatory town meeting where every citizen is allowed to come and voice their opinion. There are other towns that maybe you elect people to go and do that for you. We have, I think, the benefit of everybody gets to have their voice heard. And so we think it's really, really important that people come and take that time on November 7th at noon to come over to Medfield High School and participate in the process. I encourage everybody to come in your household that is a registered voter to please come and do that, because the only way we are going to be able to really feel good about this as a town is if we are really certain that everyone has had their chance to make their voices heard and to vote on this. If we don't come to town meeting, we are trusting our neighbors to make a good decision for us, and that's great. But I think that one of the best things that we have available to us in this country and in this town is to be able to have our right to vote. And it is so important to come to town meeting and make your voice be heard and to have that vote. And so I want you to do that. And I also want you to come on the 15th in order to vote also. I think it's really important that people do both and take both just as seriously, because even if, as I said, if the vote fails on the 7th, the vote on the 15th will still matter if they decide to do a revote within the 120 days. And they don't have to revote both. They only have to revote one. So people need to take both votes very seriously and to please come and vote on both of them as if they are the only time they're happening. You don't want to kind of decide that, oh, I'll vote if they're just going to do this again in 120 days. Let's all not assume that's going to happen. Let's assume that it's only going to happen once, and that if you come on the 7th, you get to have your voice be heard, and if you come on the 15th, that same voice is heard. And please just come and vote and participate in the process. And if you have any questions at all, please reference our website and our videos. And if you have something lingering in the next amount of time, I know that there are going to be a couple opportunities next week to do that. And so hopefully people will take advantage of that and come vote.